It's Kenny!
Throughout video game history, there have been many great and memorable moments, times of which future generations can look back and marvel upon. I could actually write a book about all the awesome stuff that's happened all through gaming's past, but I'd be lying to you viewers if I said that gaming history didn't have any fuck-up moments in it. Moments that either had us shaking our heads in disappointment and anger, or times that just simply made us cringe. In my opinion, it's best to remember these events so that hopefully they never happen again. These are the past idiotic instances that I personally compiled, so sit back and relax everyone as we take a look at the top 10 dumbest moments in gaming history, in my opinion. Number 10. Daikatana's development and release. Now, to be fair, I put this on the bottom of the list because I don't exactly think of this as a dumb moment, rather just a moment of short-sightedness. And I say that because John Romero is an awesome games developer who was a driving force behind a lot of great FPS titles. Wolfenstein 3D, Doom 1 and 2, Quake, all of those games are on Romero's resume. But then you have Daikatana, and unfortunately, this has left Romero with a bit of a dark blot on his past. The development of Daikatana was marked by a myriad of issues, one of which was the scrapping of what was 11 months worth of work, all so that the game could have a technically better engine. This delayed Daikatana, and thus consumers were pissed. Another problem that the game faced was its edgy yet arrogant advertising. From early on, Daikatana was billed as the brainchild of Romero. However, there were a lot of internal problems with the development team. These internal issues with the devs were publicized, and that fueled a sense of disgust amongst consumers concerning Daikatana's advertising. Then there was the lovely fact that a lot of the developers decided to just up and leave during production, thus delaying the game even further. Daikatana was supposed to be released in mid-1997. It wouldn't see the light of day until mid-2000. By then, your average gamer just didn't give a shit and either ignored the game or just simply hated it. Bottom line, Daikatana was not well received upon release. The gameplay was widely disliked by gamers, such as an artificially limited number of saves per level, and there was also the AI-controlled sidekicks who were more of a detriment to the player rather than a benefit. Nowadays, Daikatana is remembered as a cautionary tale to future devs, reminding them that even someone as great as John Romero can and may make a very costly mistake. Number 9. Universal sues Nintendo. I'm just gonna come out and say it, court procedures are boring as hell. I'm not sure if any of you viewers have had jury duty, but I have, and it's one of the most tedious fucking things on earth. Well, other than going to the DMV. However, this is a very interesting case and one that I thought was worthy of being on this list. Back in 1981, Nintendo, whom really didn't have a console out during the time, made an arcade game called Donkey Kong. The game was both a hit in Japan and in America. It was also the game that got Nintendo's name out to the general North American public. However, not everything was peaches and cream. Nintendo found themselves taken to court over a trademark violation from Universal Studios. In other words, Universal was suing Nintendo for copyright infringement concerning the character King Kong. But believe it or not, Universal actually had no leg to stand on when it came to presenting their case. You see, when Donkey Kong was being conceptualized, Nintendo had conducted a trademark search. Whilst they were doing this, they had discovered that there were many instances of unlicensed uses of King Kong. Though that was nothing compared to what Nintendo's lawyers had discovered. Call it fate, call it luck, call it karma, call it whatever the fuck you like. But as it turned out, King Kong's trademark was in the public domain at the time. And you know what they say, you can't sue for a trademark if you don't own it. The case was ultimately thrown out, and Nintendo had won. Universal wanted to break into the video game industry, but they were going about it in a very stupid way. Well, that's why it was a dumb moment and why I put it on my list. Number 8. Jamie Kennedy at Activision's 2007 E3 press conference. It should be known that E3 has had its own fair share of fuck-ups. There was the infamous Mr. Caffeine.
Released it long ago.
There was Konami's entire 2010 press conference.
Yes.
And who could forget that time Microsoft decided to bust out a child actress who got way too involved demonstrating the Kinect?
Skittles, that's enough. Please. I hate tickles.
Needless to say, E3 has been full of dumb moments like this. In fact, I could make a top 10 list just talking about all the dumb stuff that's happened at E3. Maybe I should do that one day. It's something to think about. But anyway, in my opinion, out of all the stupid moments throughout the convention's history, none was more idiotic or more baffling than when Activision decided to have Jamie Kennedy host their E3 press conference in 2007. Firstly, Jamie Kennedy was already a wash-up actor and comedian by 2007, and his only real claim to fame at the time was that he starred in 2 horrendously shitty films that no one liked, not legitimately anyway. Secondly, if Activision had the money to get a Hollywood actor to host one of their most important yearly press conferences, why couldn't it have been someone better? I know it kinda sounds like I'm just ragging on Jamie, but let me tell you, it's kinda warranted. The guy was completely friggin' crossfaded during the entire conference, thus delivering a very awkward and sometimes even cringy performance. Jamie even tried doing some of his stand-up on stage, and when that failed, he decided to hurl some passive-aggressive insults towards both the crowd and the developers. In short, he made an ass out of himself by acting like an absolute douche nozzle. Though, to be fair, not all the blame should be placed on Jamie. Some of it should be placed on Activision for not hiring a better celebrity. Had it have been me making the decision on who to hire, I would have chosen someone like Jerry Seinfeld, or Robin Williams, or hell, freaking Vin Diesel. You know, celebrities that are actually gamers. To this day, it still baffles me on what the execs at Activision were thinking. Stupid is as stupid does, I guess. Number 7. The 360's hardware issues. Flashback to the year 2005. What was going on? Quite a bit, actually. Resident Evil 4 and God of War were released that year, and oh yeah, the 360 was launched. The 7th generation is one of my favorite eras of video game history, and out of all the consoles that were prominent back then, the 360 had to be my favorite. Don't get me wrong, I love the PS3 and the Wii, but a lot of my favorite 7th gen games were released on the 360. However, the biggest problem that the system faced early on was its hardware issues. Perhaps you viewers have heard of the Red Ring of Death. Ah yes, the infamous 3/4 circle light up on the console, indicating a general hardware failure. It also usually meant that the 360 in question was now bricked. It all had to do with how the console was designed. During the 360's inception, the designers decided to opt for a smaller and sleeker look for the console. Seemed like a good idea, however, that design choice would ultimately become a design flaw. The 360 had a lot of hardware stuff built into it, but the fans that were necessary to keep the system cool were just too damn small, thus causing it to overheat. This overheating caused the heat sinks to crack, and it also warped the console's motherboards. Now, it should be known that not all of the first line of 360s had these hardware issues, but a vast majority of them did. The designers of the 360 should have known that putting all of these cutting-edge parts in close proximity to one another would require proper ventilation. I get that Microsoft wanted to streamline their product and get it out to the masses before Sony and Nintendo could do so with their consoles, but still, I'd have rather had the console be bigger if it meant that the failure rate would be lower. Microsoft eventually did fix this problem with later iterations of the 360, and they also extended warranties for older 360s, so at least they fixed the problem. Still, pretty dumb moment on Microsoft's end, and hell, even they admit it. Number 6. BMX XXX's controversy and failure. As the old-timers sometimes put it, nothing sells quite like controversy. But what if I told you viewers that controversy was BMX XXX's only defining feature? You see, BMX XXX was released during the extreme sports fad of the late 90s and early 2000s decades. This was the time when Tony Hawk, Matt Hoffman, and Kelly Slater were hitting it big and selling out, pulling off tricks and stunts. This explosion in popularity would inevitably lead to video games, and shit damn were there a lot of extreme sports games out during that time. In fact, there were so many that I think it's safe to say that there was a bit of an overabundance. One of the many extreme sports celebs that ended up being sponsored heavily in a video game was a BMXer by the name of Dave Mirra, who in the year 2000 starred in the title Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX. It was a good game, by no means original, but it was passable, as any other BMX game at the time. And I guess you could say that was kind of the problem. Like I said, there was a surplus of video games similar to Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX, and it wasn't doing anything special to set it apart from its contemporaries. Also, the company behind Dave Mirra BMX, Acclaim, was pitting itself against Activision, and they really had no business doing so because they were in a state of decline. You see, Acclaim saw a lot of financial success in the early to mid-90s, but when the latter half of the 90s rolled around, the company started to see a steady decline in the sales of their games. 2002 had come, and instead of just making and releasing a good game, Acclaim got the bright idea to bolster BMX XXX's sales by including vast amounts of nudity and crass humor into the final product. In other words, Acclaim put ass and titties in the game, knowing it would become controversial, and hoping that said controversy would boost sales. However, this plan backfired. It became controversial alright, but instead of driving sales for the game, it ended up hurting it. Many stores, including Toys R Us and Walmart, refused to even sell the title, and hell, even Dave Mirra himself wanted nothing to do with it, and even sued Acclaim to have his name stricken from the project. As for the final product itself, well, it turned out to be a buggy, glitch-filled mess. Poor collision detection, shoddy controls, the whole 9 yards. This led to BMX XXX receiving negative reviews from major gaming outlets, and was pretty much the final nail in the game's coffin. From a business perspective, and shit, even from my own personal perspective, Acclaim made an exceptionally stupid decision to do as they did with BMX XXX. Number 5. Action 52's price tag. Okay, I'm not gonna get too in-depth with Action 52's assorted past because I would rather save that for a review of the actual game on my own channel. Long story short, a businessman by the name of Vince Perry found a multi-cart NES game and was inspired to go into business for himself and create his own line of multi-cart video games. Action 52 was made, advertised, released, and it ended up failing very, very hard. Every game that was packed into Action 52 sucked, and that's me being nice. But probably what made this game fail the hardest was its massive retail price. Action 52, I shit you viewers not, cost $200 when it was released. $200, no joke. And this was in 1991. We're talking about over $375 in today's money. Could you imagine paying that much for one fucking game? Unless we're talking about a title like Steel Battalion on the original Xbox where you got a cool-ass controller, no one should be hawking up that kind of cash for one game. It's horse shit. I guess you could say that they rounded it out, and each game on Action 52 individually would have cost $4 a piece. However, when all the games look and feel like they were made on a budget of about $4 a piece, I can't see the justification of giving it such a high price. I also can't see the justification of giving Action 52 a regular game's price. But do you guys want to know what the sad part is? If you ever want to get a physical copy of Action 52, you better be prepared to fork out some serious moolah. I really wish I were making this up. Number 4. Nintendo thinking lightning would strike twice. The Nintendo Wii was a pretty cool 7th gen console. A lot of fun games were released for it, and it sold very, very well. It was also a bit innovative. Nintendo decided to experiment with motion controls, and whilst not every game on the Wii utilized this feature, a good percentage did, bringing us games like Super Mario Galaxy and Kirby's Epic Yarn. However, all of these good things were kind of a fluke. True, the Wii could hold its own financially against the PS3 and the 360, but from a technological standpoint, the Wii definitely lagged behind its competition. This is why it was quite important at the time for Nintendo to really get their shit together when it came to making their 8th gen console. But someone at Nintendo must have thought that lightning would strike again just like it did for the Wii, and we received the Wii U. Now don't get me wrong, I love the Wii U. It has some really good and fun games on it, but it is a seriously flawed console. Just like its predecessor, the Wii U also technologically lagged behind its competitors. That alone would have been bad enough, but Nintendo even managed to fuck up how the Wii U was marketed. The Wii had the luxury of being marketed to a wide array of different gamers. The Wii U, on the other hand, was marketed specifically towards a young audience. Kids, in other words. Another problem that the Wii U faced was its very own name. When the system was first announced, a lot of people figured that it was just going to be some kind of peripheral for the Wii. It also didn't help matters when Nintendo themselves were sort of marketing the Wii U like it was a peripheral in the beginning. All of these things were spelling disaster, but it was actually going to get worse. The biggest issue that the Wii U was up against was its lack of third-party support. Oh, the third-party support was there at the very beginning, but it quickly disappeared once it was discovered that the console was vastly underpowered compared to the PS4 and Xbox One. To say that Nintendo had made a very stupid decision in how they made and promoted the Wii U would almost be an understatement. This little act of sheer dumbness almost costed them their entire company. Had it not have been for the Switch, Nintendo probably would have ended up the way Sega did back in the early 2000s. Number 3. Capcom's heartless cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3. I don't want to sound like a weirded out fanboy, but man oh man do I love the Mega Man franchise. The original series still holds up fairly well, and then there are the sweet as hell Zero and Battle Network games. The X series is by far my favorite within the franchise, but the Legends titles are a very close second. Yeah, I know there are only 3 main games in that series, but in my humblest opinion, the stories in those games are really good and the gameplay is really fun. Now, mind you, I have a lot of nostalgia for these games because I played them a lot when I was a kid, and yes, even I have to admit that the Legends series are pretty archaic by today's standards. However, for their time, they were excellent. That's one of the reasons I thought it was quite idiotic, and maybe even a little fucked up, for Capcom to cancel the project, even though it was highly anticipated. Not to spoil anything to those who haven't played the Legends games yet, but the series ended on a cliffhanger, making those that actually played the games, like me, eager for more. The series went on a hiatus after Legends 2, but then in October of 2010, Capcom announced to the fans that they were starting development on Legends 3. At the time, it was great news because the series had been on hold for over a decade. To say that the anticipation for Legends 3 was heavy would almost be an understatement. Hell, fans of the franchise that never even played the Legend series were psyched for this title. Capcom even wanted to get fans to jump on board to help, at least in small aspects, with the development. But then a bomb dropped in July of 2011 when Capcom just callously canceled it. Out of nowhere. Those that were anticipating the game were left not only disappointed, but also wondering, why? Why did it have to be cancelled? 2 days after the cancellation, Capcom gave their reason via their UK Twitter account. In that post, they wrote, quote, "It's a shame that fans didn't want to get more involved. If we saw there was an audience for Mega Man Legends 3, people might change minds." Unquote. In other words, Capcom pretty much placed all the blame for the cancellation on the fans. Pretty fucked up, right? Though to be fair, Capcom eventually backpedaled on that statement a few days later, so maybe they didn't mean what they said, but who knows. At least there's one piece of good news out of this major fuck-up from Capcom. As of recently, the company has made more strides in returning the Blue Bomber to the masses. What with games like the Legacy Collections and Mega Man 11, who knows? Maybe Legends 3 will happen someday. Only time will tell. Number 2. The 32X's entire existence. I'm gonna try to keep this as short as I can, cause out of all the Sega consoles out there, the 32X is the only one I don't like. The rest of Sega's consoles were good, some handled much better than others, but still good. The 32X is an anomaly if I've ever seen one. Firstly, it's an add-on for the Genesis, and the Genesis already had an add-on, the Sega CD, and that was actually an okay peripheral, at least in my opinion. Regardless, it wasn't really needed. Another issue the 32X had was the fact that hooking it up was a pain in the ass. I happen to own a 32X myself, so I actually know firsthand how shitty it is to get one of these fucking things set up. Let's just say it involves a lot of wires. Probably the biggest problem that the 32X had, though, was that it was released literally months before the Saturn was launched. You know what that means? It means that the 32X was merely a placeholder until Sega's real successor to the Genesis was put on shelves. Like I said, the console's existence is an anomaly. It really has no reason to exist. Some have even questioned whether or not the 32X is even a 32-bit system. I've done my research, and whilst the 32X is a 32-bit console, it's very limited in what it can do because it's cartridge-based rather than CD-based. The system was also hard to program for, and thus only a handful of games, about 40, were ever released for it. Speaking of games, there were actually some good titles for the 32X, such as Knuckles Chaotix and Spider-Man Web of Fire. But here's the thing. These games could have easily been made for the Saturn. In fact, these games would have done better had they been on the Saturn, especially Knuckles Chaotix, which would have been a really good launch title for that system. To this day, it still bewilders me on why Sega made the decision to make the 32X. It was a stupid choice that was the beginning of Sega's unfortunate decline. Talk about one hell of a dumb move, right? Well, it actually would have been my top pick, had it not have been for... Number 1. Atari's biggest miss ever. Oh, Atari. They were once the cream of the industry crop. They had consoles, arcade machines, hell, even personal computers. Atari was once the king of video games back in the late 70s and early 80s. Then the crash happened, and things haven't been the same for them since. But would you viewers believe me if I said that the video game landscape of today might look completely different had Atari made a different choice back in 1984? In order to get a better understanding, we're going to go over a little bit of history and also talk about the stock market. Yeah, I know that stock market bit sounds a little boring, but let me explain. Due to corporate mismanagement within the industry as well as an overflowed marketplace, video game stocks didn't just start going down in 1983, they plunged. It got so bad that by the end of the year, Atari had reported a whopping $500 million loss of revenue. That's right, $500 million right down the crapper. By the beginning of 1984, most companies decided to just pull out of the business altogether, except for Atari, that is. As I mentioned before, Atari was also in the personal computer market, and personal computers were becoming a big deal in 83 and 84. So naturally, Atari decided to just focus all their attention on their computers, and left the console industry to its fate. For a while, anyway. Whilst the crash was going on in North America, a little-known company in Japan called Nintendo had just launched their family computer, or Famicom console. The Famicom was a huge overnight success in Japan, but Nintendo wanted to take their product international. To do that, they had to first break into the North American market. So one fine day in 1984, representatives of Nintendo met with some executives of Atari, one of which was then president of the company, Jack Tramiel. Anyway, Nintendo offered Atari a deal to produce the Famicom in both North America and in Europe. Nintendo would supply the individual parts for the console as well as the games, and Atari would in turn manufacture the consoles and also localize the games. Seemed like a pretty good deal. Hell, even Nintendo's then president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, hoped that there would one day be a long-term deal and even a soft merger with Atari. However, the meeting was held at the worst possible time. It was during the crash, after all. So needless to say, the meeting was a bust, and it ended with Jack Tramiel stating to Nintendo's representatives, quote, "Consoles are dead." This is where the stock market comes back into play. Remember how I mentioned that video game stocks were down really bad? Well, that's kind of stocks in general. In other words, stocks are very bipolar. They could be making tons of money one minute and then quickly losing money the next. Regardless, Atari should have had the foresight to know that video game stocks would eventually swing back in the right direction. Had they have went through with this deal, Atari would be a huge name today. But sadly, it never happened. Nintendo a few months later would go on to incorporate North America and release the critically acclaimed NES at the tail end of 1984. And as for Atari, they went on to re-enter the console market, but they were met by failure after failure after failure. Until eventually, they stopped making hardware altogether. Oh, Atari's still around as a decent third-party company, but let me tell you, they will never relive their glory days from the late 70s and early 80s. You done missed the money train, Atari. It was the most foolish thing you've ever done, and it was the most foolish thing I could think of for this list. Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed this little tour through Stupidsville. Do you agree with my list? Do you think that there were dumber moments in video game history? Well, then why don't you leave a like and comment below. I'll make sure to personally get to your messages. Also, if you really liked the video and want to see more from yours truly, hit that subscribe and bell icon so that you can be notified whenever I or the other dudes here on Tomasi Entertainment make a video.
Click the like.